Dr. Dave Rabin, cortisol is obviously a problem in today's world, but how does cortisol intersect with heart rate variability? And how does that intersect with maybe visceral fat, poor metabolic health, mitochondrial function, the works? How does this all link together?
It's a big question. I think, cortisol itself is a stress hormone, right? And it may or may not be cortisol itself that's the problem. It might be some other part of the cortisol system that is problematic. So I'll give you an idea of this. So cortisol itself as a hormone has a cycle during our day and night, right? It's not the same level all the time, which is why it's so hard to measure. It follows like what's called a diurnal cycle, so like a night and day cycle. So cortisol tends to be to peak like in the to be lower at night and then like peak in the morning and then get higher up and down a little bit during the day depending on our stress level, and then starts to wind down again at night around our bedtime, and then peak again or start to peak again the next morning when you wake up. So that diurnal cycle is a natural rhythm of cortisol release in our bodies. What is changing that we're not measuring when we focus only on cortisol, the hormone, is the cortisol receptor functioning, right? Because you can have the same cortisol rhythm and have a receptor that has, we'll call it trauma markers on it, right? And we know from Rachel Yehuda's work and many others now that from back 40 years ago, that if people have experienced severe trauma, and especially if they have a diagnosis of like post-traumatic stress disorder, that they will have changes to the gene expression of their cortisol receptor at certain sites. That changes how tightly the receptor binds to cortisol. It changes how sensitive the receptor is when cortisol binds to it. And it changes the downstream response of what the receptor does when cortisol binds to it. So that is a lot of stuff that's happening from a modification to a receptor that can change the way that the cortisol receptor system is functioning, regardless of how, if whether you could have the perfect amounts of cortisol in your body, but your cortisol receptor system and therefore your entire stress response system may not be functioning correctly because it's actually a receptor problem. And we see this in a lot of mental health and especially in mental health, because we talk about serotonin and serotonin receptors all the time. And many of our drugs target same thing, increasing serotonin, but that's not solving the problem. It just stabilizes the system. The receptors still have to be fixed. So there's actually, so I think the way that ties into HRV and the general metabolic physiology of how well the body's functioning is, if we think about the link between trauma and cortisol receptor functioning, which is a very important discovery by Dr. Yehuda, then that helps us understand that traumatic memories of experience from the past that impacts our bodies stored not just on a level of our brains, like I remember that. It's not just on that level, and it's not just on the level of our bodies where we're like, we don't really remember that, but our bodies do. It's on our DNA, because that's how the cortisol receptor changes its function, is that the memory from that experience has a meaning, and that meaning tells us something about ourselves that we agree with whether we like it or not, because it has an impact on our bodies. And then that changes the epigenetic code that tells a cortisol receptor how to be made from the DNA.
Which makes sense. I mean, that makes very logical sense as well. Like if you are someone that has had a major stressful event, it would make sense that you would have a stronger affinity for cortisol to bind, right? Like it would, like in that sense, right?
Well, yeah, I think the question is, I think there's still some work to be done to figure out, is it stronger binding or is the receptor less functional?
So you have higher circulating in that case.
Right. So you might have higher circulating cortisol, but you might have less sensitive receptors.
Interesting.
Or in some cases you might have, like in PTSD, Rachel's clue was that everybody thought PTSD patients had higher cortisol all the time. what clued her into the receptor problem is that people, if you actually just look at PTSD people and you get rid of like depression folks and you get rid of other folks, they actually have the opposite. They have low cortisol.
Ah, gotcha.
And so then you look at the receptor, like, oh, net, it's actually a receptor problem. And the reason why that's interesting is because trauma on the body, the effects of trauma on the body, increases fight or flight nervous system activity around the clock, because it's fear learning. Trauma is fear learning. So PTSD is a fear learning disorder.
Yep.
So if you're increasing the body, if the body's learning fear to fear parts of the environment, and then everything associated with those situations, then that gets stored. That affects first your sympathetic nervous system, right? So your fight or flight system gets turned on more often, sometimes all the time, because maybe there's things all the time that remind you of that fear, that potential threat, or that actual threat. And then from there, your vagus nerve, which governs all rest and recovery in the body, turns down. So the immediate response is that as fight or flight nervous system activity turns up, as we perceive fear in the moment, cortisol goes up. Yep. But that doesn't mean cortisol is up all the time. Yeah. Right. And then that's impacting how the receptors are still binding cortisol, and they're still completing their downstream action of there's an inflammation response happening. Right. And I think that is actually the bigger problem than that we talk about it, but we don't really address it very well, which is that in states of chronic stress, you don't want cortisol to be high all the time. You don't want it to be low all the time. You want to just follow its regular diurnal cycle, right? But the problem is when we're exposed to chronic stress all the time, what happens is the body perceives threat all the time. And in that state, there is constantly, not just cortisol, but with every single inflammatory marker in the body goes up. And it's a lot of that inflammation that is good in the moment, really, really bad day over day, week over week, month over month, because it creates damage to cells and damage in the body when you have chronic inflammation happening. So cortisol is a great signal. HRV is a great signal, because HRV shows us, oh, you just had some stuff happen. Your vagus nerve activity went down. Your HRV is going down. You're probably not recovered fully from that thing that happened to you. And that's likely going to, reflect your inflammatory biomarkers in your body. But I would say of the biomarkers we have right now, they are all related to this balance between the fight or flight system and the vagal parasympathetic rest and digest system, and how they are responding to stress, not just in the moment, but over time. And then HRV is our best current predictor that we have of how recovered the body is in terms of what happened after the event, right? Like, are you back to baseline yet? Are you better than baseline? Did you grow from it? Or did you get set back?
After this video, I put a link down below for Seed Probiotic. I don't always take probiotics because a lot of them out there are complete garbage, but Seed puts their money where their mouth is. They utilize a capsule inside of a capsule technology, which has a multi-stage delivery. So you're getting a prebiotic and a probiotic in one. If you crack the capsule open, there's literally another capsule inside. So really cool technology. And when you're talking about the world of longevity, well, gut health does matter. It's one of the biggest pieces when we're talking about inflammatory responses, when we're talking about, of course, digestion. Again, if you're making any change to your diet this year, one of the first things you want to do in addition to that is change your probiotic or change your gut microbiome a little bit so that your body can actually start making those changes internally. So that link is down below for 20% off. I highly recommend you check them out. Totally. Yeah, it makes total sense. So at this point, I mean, it would probably be much more valuable for someone to measure their HRV than to ever measure like salivary cortisol or anything like that.
For the average person who does not have a huge budget and a ton of time to spend constantly measuring stuff about your body, it's higher yield as a biomarker to measure HRV than pretty much any other biomarker we have right now for stress in the body.
So we can see
and recovery.
We can see through HRV. I mean, essentially, there's a number of different things that will cause that to, cascade in whatever direction. I'd imagine. I would say, what would you say? We're not talking specific lifestyle things, but in terms of maybe metrics or signals, what is the biggest disruptor of HRV? Like if we were looking at categories of, okay, like inflammatory cascade or, acute stress from this result, or from this event, which would obviously cause an inflammatory response. But what is the single most powerful thing that's changing our HRV for the worse?
It's hard. It's like so many things change it, right? So like getting a terrible night's sleep is going to have one of the biggest impacts on your HRV. Drinking alcohol, right before bed is going to prevent you from having that good night's sleep. So you're going to have big impact on HRV. But HRV and all of these stress biomarkers that we're talking about, especially cortisol, are interesting not because of what information they tell us about what's happening at the time of the test.
Yeah.
It's how does you have to think about it from the perspective of having multiple data points to look at a trend, right? So before we just look at HRV as a single measure, my HRV is 30 today, right? We have to understand and have a really strong understanding of what is my HRV normally for the last month, right? Not what was it 5 years ago? Like what was it the last 30 days? So if you understand, so we get that, it's called a baseline. So we go in, we measure HRV, we get a baseline, and then we understand ideally with that baseline taken at rest, which is now can be done easily with an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch, you just wear it to bed. It automatically calculates your HRV by taking rest measurements during sleep and gives you a pretty accurate number and a range. Once you understand what that is, then a month later, when you go into your day-to-day life and you're about to go do something, maybe it's something hard, right? Maybe it's something you're maybe not feeling super ready to do, and you measure your HRV, and your HRV is 20% lower than it normally is at your baseline. That tells you a couple things, right? It tells you you're probably not as recovered as you think you are. You're probably not as recovered as you normally were the month before. You're probably 20% more likely to make mistakes if you're pushed to do something tough. You're probably 20% less likely to be consistent.
Yeah.
Right? And you're probably 20%-ish more likely to quit if things get really hard.
Yeah.
When you're pushing yourself. More likely to get sick if you push yourself. So from that perspective, it becomes really useful after you already have a bunch of data points to give you a baseline. HRV becomes very useful because you can use it on a day-to-day or week-over-week really basis and say like, use it as a metric for recovery. And if you see your HRV is starting to trend down below your baseline, you know, hey, let's start to take it easy so that I don't get sick, right? You can use it preventatively. And that's really, really helpful. We just don't have other tools like that that you can measure it through the skin. You know what I mean? You don't need to draw blood. You don't need to spit into a cup a whole bunch of times and pay a bunch of money to get the analysis of cortisol, salivary cortisol. Like there are uses for that. But in a general consumer type of way, like HRV is easily the best, most accurate, useful one that we have.
It's probably somewhat of a predictive marker for Ross too, right? I mean, for just oxidative stress, if you were, let's say I'm going to go work out and my HRV is 20% lower. I mean, you know that workout is going to probably yield a significantly more or, higher amount of oxidative stress. And then it starts tying back into the mitochondrial discussion, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we're looking at sort of how this plays into the metabolic piece, what do we see with even HRV data and potentially mitochondrial health? Or I always come back to the visceral fat side of things because it's of a lot of interest with people right now, but also, we have a crap load more glucocorticoid receptors in the visceral fat. So we know that there's like this chronic hyperinsulinemia along with chronically high stress. That is a combination that is very problematic for visceral fat. And there's a lot of still kind of unwinding as to what's happening there. It has to do with, glucose disposal and a number of other things too. But I'm curious your take on that and how this all kind of weaves in.
Yeah, I mean, we've known for a long time in medicine that having too much visceral fat is not good predictor for health. Yeah. And that stress, people who tend to be stressed and sedentary, but especially have high levels of stress, tend to have more visceral fat. And that correlates with a much higher chance of like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and other health issues. So there's definitely something real there. And I think I don't think we fully mapped out how you get from, although we could do it, but how do you get from like chronic stress or day-to-day stress to the acceleration of development of visceral fat and then from there to heart disease, right? Like I think the body, my understanding of it is that the body is storing fat because it perceives that we might run out of food, right? And so there's a concept that when we're in our fight or flight survival state, there's only like 6 things that are supposed to trigger that state. They're lack of air, in order of importance: lack of air, lack of water, lack of food, lack of shelter and physical safety, lack of sleep, and lack of connection to others, lack of connection to your community. So those 6 survival things are pretty much the only reasons why our sympathetic fight or flight nervous system evolved to turn on. So when we look at what happens when that system is running for a really long time, when it has surplus of calories in a state where caloric deprivation or famine could be a historical reason why that state was induced, guess what? All of a sudden it's like, wow, there's tons of calories here. I'm not letting those go. We're storing them for later just in case, right? And we see that the body starts to build up, especially across generations. People can build up generational like patterns of where they store fat from having famine in the past, like, many different cultures. So that's really interesting. And I think on the mitochondrial side, the best way to think about that is when our bodies are in a state of austerity, our cells make and use energy differently because they don't necessarily have enough energy around or nutrients around to make energy. And they don't know when necessarily that there's going to continue to be more nutrients around. So our cells have ways of working with the mitochondria inside the cells to make energy highly efficiently and in a way that has very low production of reactive oxygen species and very low toxicity in terms of waste creation from the energy. Every time we make energy, every time a cell does anything, performs a function, there's waste created, right? So that waste can be highly toxic and need to be removed immediately, like in the case of amyloid protein in the brain, when neurons make protein that if it sticks around, turns into amyloid plaques, you get dementia if it sticks around too long. So we have to sleep deep restful REM, like, the deep stages of sleep, because that's what results in the clearing of those amyloid proteins that have been accumulated from the work the brain's been doing during the day. So when the rule is basically that when with few exceptions, but when our cells are deprived of nutrients and they don't have access, or they are under too much demand from stress. So too much inflammatory biomarkers we're under stress. We're like constantly feel like we're late to a meeting every single day, too many responsibilities, overwhelmed. Cell is asked to work harder. So when the cell's working harder, it uses more energy. And then it starts to think that when the energy starts to get depleted, I still need to work. So how am I going to work without the glucose, which might be the regular thing that it would use, and say, okay, well, we're going to start digesting fat or proteins, breaking down proteins to make that energy. You get like, and so that's where like the ketone stuff comes in when you don't have. So effectively, in many cases, if the energy source is inefficient, then more waste gets produced as a result of the production of energy, which is not a problem unless the waste removal is also impaired.
Yeah, and it's also probably changing the partitioning in which how your body is obtaining that glucose, right? If it's getting it from gluconeogenesis predominantly, then, yes, if you're in a ketogenic state, that gluconeogenesis could be driven mainly by glycerol. But if you're not, that's driven by breaking down muscle tissue.
Right.
So then you have the classic skinny fat situation,
right?
Visceral fat accumulation, loss of muscle mass. It's like the classic case right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is avoided. It's very avoidable. Right. But I think a lot of people don't understand how they get there.
Well, it's difficult because how the heck are we not supposed to be in a chronic state of stress? Realistically, it's like it takes a legit pattern interrupt to actually see that you're in that state all the time.
Yeah.
So we start talking about that. It's like, what do people do? Because you're not going to get people to just flip a switch and not be stressed out anymore, or not live the American lifestyle of chasing whatever it is we're chasing, right? Like it's it almost comes down to, I guess, gamification in some way. But I think there needs to be a big aha moment for a lot of people.
Definitely.
Which, I mean, how do people do that?
I mean, there's a bunch of ways to do it. This is actually a big topic of my book.
Yeah.
That's coming out. So let's talk about the game for a second. So what if we did gamify it a little more for people? What if the game we're supposed to be playing as being humans on this earth, in this life, is not about how much we accumulate, which is the game that we're currently playing and told to play. What if it's about how in tune we are with ourselves and the earth?
I'm with you on that, 100%.
So if you changes the nature of how we live quite a bit just by rethinking what is the purpose of the game, right? Like if right now people are very much caught up in, I am here to accumulate stuff and power and status. And you can see it every single day with all the crazy that's going on, right? So if we realize, doesn't take that much insight to say, how much happier are you now that you accumulated all that stuff you were told to accumulate? Most people, after they've made about $80,000 to $120,000 a year, they have about, I think the statistic is like something like $4,000, $6,000 of free spending money a month. So you pass that, basically more money causes more problems for people. They don't get happier. They don't have more joy or fulfillment from accumulating more stuff once they have their core basic needs met.
Yeah.
So if we can all accept that and just take a step back for a moment, which usually helps, take a nice deep breath, take a step back and just be like, what game am I playing? Right? Is more stuff actually making me more happy? Is this accumulation of things game that I'm playing, told to play, is this actually giving me fulfillment and joy? Or is it not? And it's just a simple question. And if it's not, or you're not sure, then try changing the game you're playing. Nobody else can do that, but you can change the game you're playing by just reorienting your priorities around, practicing and prioritizing time around being more in tune with yourself, nature, listening to your intuition more, taking more time out to slow things down, take breaks. Breaks are good. Play is healing. Play is like, one of the greatest sources of longevity and health span, and we relegate it to immature children. Yeah. But like we have immature children inside of us still. So like they need to play. They're upset.
No, for sure. One of my favorite Alan Watts talks was he was talking about how he was actually making fun of jogging. And it was just kind of funny. He's just like, obviously.
He's great.
I mean, and as a runner, like I thought it was funny because I'm just like, yeah, he's like, that's this deplorable thing. People just running on their heels. And like, he's like frolicking and playing through a field and running at full speed with nowhere to go is fun and good. And that's what we should be doing. He's like, but the moment it becomes about this betterment, and it's interesting because that's the question I want to ask is like, we get to this paradoxical point of betterment. We all want to be better, self-help, this, that. And it gets to a point where it's a little bit frustrating because you're like, I don't want to be complacent, but I also don't know if I just want to be better all the time.
For sure.
And that's an interesting paradox with performance. But what I've personally found, and I really want to talk to you about this, is like when the pressure is off and performance becomes fun and it's present, ironically, the performance is better. But there's probably physiology to back this up too, and science to back this up. And I want to go here with this discussion because even though it's still surrounding visceral fat, I think that it's almost as though if someone were to just go out and sprint and play tag with their kids, and do these, we gamify it with, okay, HIIT is supposedly the best exercise modality for visceral fat, reduction. That's kind of, we've seen that. Okay. We gamify it, we put it into this bucket. Next thing you know, it becomes a chore, it becomes a job, it becomes something that you're doing for betterment. And it's probably losing some of its, at least intrinsic value. Yeah. But going out and playing tag and running around and being an idiot and not caring what people think is ironically probably the best way to just drop that stuff. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
So where does, what you do and these discussions that you have, because this is your wheelhouse, like where does this all play into performance?
I mean, a lot of it comes down to, like, philosophically speaking, you've heard the saying, the ends justify the means.
Yeah.
That's not actually true. We just say it all the time as if it were.
True.
It's actually the means that manifest the ends.
Elaborate.
So what you just described, where free play becomes a performance job,
Yeah.
right? Like with HIIT training to lose visceral fat, and it takes on structure, it takes on routine, it takes on I am supposed to be doing something right now, right? It takes on other characteristics because we've just said we are focused entirely on betterment, which is the end goal.
Yeah.
But what happens when you reach betterment?
What is betterment?
You just want to get even better.
Yeah.
There's no, do you know what I mean? There's no finite
sure.
end to any of this. We're on a lifelong journey where it's hopefully up and to the right, but it's like a constant journey that is evolving and changing all the time. And so if we focus on the end, we miss the best part of that journey, which is the means. It's the play. It's what you're saying. Like it's the fun of the being present in the moment, doing whatever it is you're doing, knowing that the outcome you desire will happen. You will get it because you're present in the moment with your whole self, doing what it is you want to do for fun. So could you, if your sole goal is to just lose visceral fat by doing HIIT training, you can do that by doing HIIT training, and then you will have created for yourself an ends that justify your means of doing your HIIT training to get your visceral fat gone. But wouldn't it be better if you could get rid of your visceral fat, lose your visceral fat by doing training of some sort, and it was fun and enjoyable and enriched your life in other ways, right? Like it doesn't just have to be, I'm going to do this kind of thing, even though I'm suffering through it to get to end goal A, right? It can be, I have end goal A envisioned in my mind as I know that this is where I want to go, and I've been taught that it's going to take X, Y, Z to get there. So I'm just going to I'm going to curate my life in a way that facilitates me having more X, Y, Z more often. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense.
Then A is just going to come.
Yeah.
Right. So it's more about creating, I think to Alan Watts' point, it's removing the rigidity of the structure that prevents play from happening, so that there are certain things in life that need rigidity and structure for sure. But if we can remove a lot of that from the things that are really supposed to be like fun, like running in a field, then we still get to the same goal. Sometimes we get to the goal faster and better, but we certainly, regardless, even if it takes the same amount of time to get to the goal, we have more fun doing it and feel less stressed out during the process. So again, the means actually manifest the ends, because when you focus on the process itself, the day-to-day, moment-to-moment process, you actually are getting more out of it than you are when you're going through the motions of the process, just focused on what does it look like at the end.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And then where would wisdom or sort of that concrete sort of episodic memory in some ways come into this, right? Because we want to learn things. People are listening to this, they're watching this because they want to learn, and they want, they're in a learning environment. But it's hard not to almost become, well, then what's the point in acquiring wisdom if I'm just trying to be present? Does this wisdom ultimately guide us to be more present? Does it give us you get what I'm saying with that? Mm-hmm. It's like, where's the initiative to want to learn in that, right? If it seems as though a lot of times intellect and this more like executive function almost pulls you out of the present. It like wants to pull you forward. Or is that really just a matter of our past and our experiences that are driving what we think should be?
Yeah, it's kind of that. Yeah. It's more like wisdom is a state that we train ourselves to get into, which is a goal state. It's the peak of knowledge, which is knowing when to wait and knowing when to act or say something, right? And feeling it, knowing, not guessing, not forcing, not pushing, just knowing that patience is actually virtue.
Yeah.
Right. And I think like when I think about it like kind of like a progression of hierarchy of how we store and intake information. So it starts with listening to your environment, right? We have to listen to the world around us. We have to be present in some way to be able to take in information, right? And then when that information comes in, once we're listening, if we're just listening to what's going on up here, we're missing everything out here, right? If we're ruminating on our thoughts or, maybe left the stove on or by regretting the things of the past or fearing the things of the future, you're missing everything in the right now, right? So the techniques we use for that are going back to your body because the mind and the body are connected and the body never leaves the now. The body is always present. It's always here. Our minds could be anywhere. So we call somatic techniques, which soma means body. It's going back to your body by doing slow, deep breathing by choice, soothing touch with another person or hugging yourself or using tools like Apollo or any kind of vagal nerve activating techniques. They bring you back into your body. So that gets you into a listening state. And you have to feel safe to be able to come back into your body. So if our bodies perceive threat from the environment, then we have to kind of like top down remind ourselves by doing the breath, the touch, the meditation, mindfulness, yoga, the techniques we're talking about, remind ourselves, hey, we're safe enough to just take this in right now. And that's where it starts. And that's where learning starts too, is listening. If we're not listening, we're not learning. If we're trying to learn and not listening, we're just recycling the same garbage going on here all the time.
Yeah.
So it starts with listening. And then I talk about this as like a hierarchy. So it's like listening times time equals data, right?
Yep.
So as soon as you start opening your mind and your body to the information that's around you in the present moment, you start to collect data points. But data isn't that useful because data alone, single data points, disorganized, like they don't really mean anything. You need a trend.
Yeah.
So you start to listen. So you start to look at data. You've taken data, and then data times time equals information. Information is organized data.
Yeah.
Right? Across time. Now you start to get trends of 2 data points, 3 data points, 4, 5, 6. You start to see lines you can draw between them, and you start to build trends. Start to get interesting information from those trends. Then information over time, information times time is knowledge, which is the information contextualized. It's like organized into our lives. It's not just information. It's like this actually fits here, right? And then, but knowledge is still like really rooted in like concept.
Yeah.
So it's not fully integrated with what I would call the goal, which is that when you practice gaining knowledge over time, you then develop wisdom. So that's the hierarchy. It's like listening, data it organizes over time to information organizes over time into knowledge, and then knowledge organizes over time into wisdom. And wisdom is like the ultimate goal because you just know what to do in this situation you're in, right? Because you've had the time. Wisdom requires a lot of time to develop that skill. It's like a lifelong, practice.
But it does ultimately come back to those 6 survival needs and your wisdom ultimately just to keep the organism alive, right? To know when to act and know when not to. And it's like you think about...
And to know when you're being tricked into thinking that. That's wisdom.
Yes.
Knowledge is knowing when to act and when not to in that way with survival. Wisdom is knowing, hey, this is a trick. I've seen this. Does that make sense?
That is really cool. That is and that's like, I think everyone has to start developing a radar for that this day and age with social media, with everything. It's like I think we are developing that wisdom and we may not even realize it, right? We're starting to have a radar for that kind of, for like a BS meter on a lot of things, but it's like
some of us.
Yeah, for sure. But it's interesting. You think about even wisdom and gaining knowledge, even that has been turned into just an act of betterment. Like you want to learn a language, the goal of learning that language should be if I want to learn Italian, it's because I want to go hang out with Italian people and I want to connect, right? Here's one of those survival needs, right? That connection. Or I want to, I want that connection, and I want to gain that knowledge because of what it brings me in the present, not because I want to get an A on my, Italian exam. Right. And it's interesting because you obviously, come from academia. So it might be it's probably a struggle for you in some ways when you look at this, where you're like, okay, so much of academia is just like this. And you're like, why? But why? Like, do you want to be here?
Yeah, and suffer to accomplish this thing that we're setting out in front of you. Yeah. Right? Like, we're not going to make it fun. We're going to make it really hard.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I think, and you've said safety a number of times, which is so interesting because I think when it comes back to almost everything metabolic health, it's a matter of the nervous system. It's a matter of safety.
Yeah.
You look at like chronic back pain, you look at all the surrounding even pain, like it's so wild, like the stories that we essentially unknowingly tell ourselves about pain, right? Like, oh, my back hurts, or my back hurt when I did that. So my brain's going to continue to tell me a story that my back's going to hurt when I do that. And it's like, pain isn't even in the body, pain is in the brain. And so it's the same kind of thing with the metabolic health piece, where it's like, if we can find safety, if we can actually get to that place where we're safe, like really safe, that stuff does fall in line. And it sounds woo-woo, but it's the total cheat code. Like it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And because safety is like the key environmental trigger of the vagus nerve activity. So it's like, as soon as we send safety signals to the body in any way we do it, again, slow, deep breathing, soothing touch, soothing music, soothing vibrations like Apollo, or any yoga, movement, any of these things where you're showing yourself, hey, I'm in control of my environment right now because I can take a breath. That safety signal immediately increases vagus nerve activity. As soon as you increase vagus nerve activity, metabolism shifts. Blood flow shifts immediately. Rather than sending all your blood to the muscles or to your motor cortex of your brain or to the heart and lungs to get you out of a fight or flight situation, all the blood goes back to all the stuff we want to be activated, all the organ systems we want to be activated when we're not in a survival situation. What are those? Literally everything else. It's metabolism, sleep and rest. It's digestion, immunity, reproduction, empathy, creativity, like all the good stuff. All the good stuff is vaguely regulated by safety. And the reason why, from an evolutionary perspective, is because it'd be really, really bad if those got confused, right?
Yeah.
Like if we were running from a lion in prehistoric times, like 10, 15,000 years ago or longer, and then all of a sudden our reproductive system decided to turn on.
Yeah.
And we started empathizing with the lion.
Yeah.
We'd be eaten immediately.
Yeah.
Right? If that lion was hungry.
Yeah.
So like the system has been designed, hardwired to not allow that to happen. And I think most people, this was not well taught to me either. And I went to decades of like post-college school, but I think it's really important to talk about, which is that, that in modern day society, like thankfully we don't have lions chasing us all the time, right? We generally have enough air. We generally have enough water and food. Sleep, meh, right? Connection, there's generally, for most people, there's at least one or two other people around and they have like some kind of sense of community. And physical safety generally for most people. So if we can check almost all or all of those core survival boxes, the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system, should never be taking over because those boxes are all checked. And yet it seems to take over all the time, almost every day. And the reason why is because our stress response system and the amygdala, the fear center, is exquisitely sensitive to contrast detection, not just fear.
Okay.
So it's detecting changes in the environment, which is the core evolutionary fear signal. Newness in the environment, too much, too fast, too new, unfamiliar. In the prairies or the jungle could result in imminent demise.
Yeah.
Right? In modern day society, it's our bread and butter. In the first 30 minutes of every day, people are in their phones taking in as much information as they were in a week of being alive in the 1950s, most of it new. So why are we surprised that our nervous system is acting on sympathetic fight or flight survival overdrive all the time, right? That's what's going to happen when we have surrounded ourselves with more stimulation than we have ever had in the history of human society. And it's only getting more. So what we have to do the antidote is that we have to strengthen the attention filter, right? Like we have to, there's a filter in the brain that filters out most of the incoming information that's thrown at us every day. We have to make that filter even tighter, even stronger, and then train what I call like the attentional muscle, the muscle of focused attention, and treat it like it's a muscle you can build in the gym, which it is. The more that we control our attention and say, hey, that thing that I'm focused on, it's making me think that I am under threat right now, but I'm not. So it's not useful to me right now. So I'm going to notice I'm focusing on it. I'm going to take my attention and bring it back to my breath, right? You've just then in that moment done a rep for your attention muscle. And you have to just keep doing it. And the more we do that and the more we train our attentional filter, then the less untrue, useless information that we're constantly inundated with gets in the first place. And when it does get in, we can attend away from it by choice and restore autonomy, control, mastery. Does that make sense?
For sure. Yeah. Our brain is just constantly trying to, create like a predictive value of what's happening around us with all the information, right?
Yeah.
Probably information that we also aren't aware of too, right? Just whatever information at whatever level that was beyond our typical senses. So by training this sort of attention muscle, let's just actually back up and take a look at it from another perspective. If you're like an extremely open-minded individual and you're in almost this meditative state, like, isn't that sort of the opposite of that in some ways? Like you're like creating so much attention that you're actually creating more awareness. That's where it's confusing, right? Because you almost feel it's like, well, I'm opening up my aperture in so many ways where you're almost, I think anyone that's meditated has had those periods where it's almost like you feel like you're getting downloads when you're in that good state, right? Where you're like taking in so much information and you're almost energetically open. And then it's like you're taking in so much information, but the irony of it is you're also so disciplined and focusing that attention muscle. And you look at like Zen culture, right? Like they're so disciplined down to how you wash your hands. Everything is a system, yet they're also like the most, who knows if you already put them in the, what would Ram Dass used to say, what you think you're enlightened, spend 2 weeks with your family, right?
Yeah.
It's like who knows if you take them out of that scenario and put them in the real world, what would respond? But how does that sort of paradox work? Because it's like you want to focus attention, but at the same time, you also want to focus on this awareness.
Well, it's just what information do you want coming into your system, right? Like think about it like whatever information is coming in, whatever we pay attention to, attention, let me take a step back. Our attention is the gateway to our consciousness. When we pay attention to something by choice or not by choice, we give it permission, like a vampire, to enter into our conscious awareness. And it stays there until we attend away from it. Or if it induces emotions and feelings, we have to process those feelings and then attend away from it.
Gotcha.
Right?
I'm getting you. I'm clocking you now. Yeah.
So untrue and useless thoughts, which would basically be, for the most part, any thoughts we have about things that are the past or the future. The past has already happened. The future is outside of our control and we can't predict it. We're just predicting. So worrying about the future and regretting the past as two examples of completely useless thoughts that we engage with all the time are like thought vampires. That's what probably most of us are spending, like 80%, I would say, from what I've seen in myself and my patients. I'd say people probably spend, generally speaking, the average person about 80% of their time on this in their adult lives thinking about not what's happening right now, but thinking about the past or thinking about the future. So that means only 20% of us is left for right now.
Yeah.
So if we're trying to make a decision about something happening right now, and the decision is supposed to be data driven, and data comes from listening, but only 20% of us is listening to what's going on right now, how good is the quality of the data going to be to make that decision?
Yeah. Crap. Yeah.
It's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
It's going to be mostly fabricated based on what we
That's a
thought
good point.
in the past,
Yep.
right? And so the future prediction, rather than becoming accurate based on present updated information from more of us being here, as Ram Dass says, being here now to take in the signs and the information that's coming, it fabricates a future based on a past that is dominating our thoughts and just a little bit of ourselves that's here now that's not really able to take in very much, but what limited it takes in informs the mostly fabricated future prediction. And then because we're not present, we ultimately manifest that future prediction that we often don't want. Yeah. So we wind up not where we want to be. And if we recognize that we are making a choice to allow the vampire thoughts in by inviting them with our attention is the invitation to mingle with our consciousness. If we don't pay attention to a thought, what happens to it?
Goes away.
It just kind of floats away. And then it comes back. Yeah. And then it just kind of floats away. And you can watch it. We are not our thoughts, right? We are the observer behind the thoughts. It's very important. These are all like Buddhist and Buddhist teachings, right?
Do you think that thoughts are you have such an interesting background, like our thoughts, neural signaling, or do you think there's a possibility that thoughts, there's like an information sphere, then we're like thoughts are actually have not validity, but it's information that is possibly not relevant, sometimes relevant. It's like, that's the question, right? Where does the thought come from? Right?
I mean, I don't know if we 100% know the answer to that, but I would say that the second concept that you brought up, kind of like the idea of like an information sphere where we are living in an environment where there's tons of stuff going on, and there's also tons of other entities like us around that also have the capacity for thought.
Yeah.
And human beings are like the most advanced, giant, walking sensory organs that have ever existed. Like, we are giant sensory organs. We have sense of everything. We sense everything. We sense the 5 physical senses. We have 6th sense. We sense like love. We can sense when somebody's talking about us from around the world and know to call them, even though we don't know why we're calling them, just because we thought about them, right? Maybe they thought about us first. And usually you call them and they're like, hey, I was just thinking about you, right? You've had that happen.
Of course. Yeah.
We have sense of time. We have a sense of space. We have sense of like the physical earth that we're interacting with, nature. Like, there's all these different kinds of senses that we have. So what is the product of sensing information, right? Like when we're living in our day-to-day on the earth, like all of this stuff is happening around us in the same time that we're here. What's the product? The product is kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
And, just because a thought emerges from this collective soup that is like the conscious world that we're living in does not mean that it's deserving of your or my attention at the time that it arises.
That's where wisdom comes in. To a degree.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wisdom is like when you already know what to, but you train wisdom, you get yourself closer to wisdom by practicing techniques like what we call in cognitive behavioral therapy is thought questioning. It's a very basic technique. It's very simple and it's very, very important. Foundational for thinking, critical thinking. And it's just thought comes in. We don't judge the thought. We don't engage with it in any way. We don't identify with it. We just notice it, right? Core of mindfulness, just noticing that there's a thought there. And then you ask yourself, is this thought true and useful to me right now? That's it. And most people, when they ask themselves that question, find out that about 80% of their thoughts are not passing the test. They're either true or useful, but they're not both true and useful right now. Because right now is only about thoughts that are relevant to right now. So if I'm thinking about like how I regretted something in the past or how I'm worried about something in the future, it's not going to pass that test. Even if it's true, it's not useful to me in this moment when I'm sitting here with you. So I can just let it go and just watch it go. And every time it goes, there's a chance it's going to come back, and I would just put it through the test again. And there's a chance it doesn't come back. But the point is that I don't have to engage with it. And I think a lot of people are not taught that properly. Like, we're taught that our thoughts are like part of us, and that it means something about us when we think about things in a certain way. And that's a scary misunderstanding, right? Like, you probably hear like kids often talk about this or maybe you've had this experience yourself where a kid has a scary thought about like wanting to hurt somebody else, right? And like, how do you say this without like, how do you tell them without just spoiling their innocence? Like, hey kid, we all have those thoughts.
Yeah.
we all want to choke somebody out sometimes when we're really pissed off.
Yeah.
It's not part of you or anything wrong with you that you have those thoughts. It's your body's natural reaction to being angry.
Yep.
Right? Let me show you how to take that anger out in a constructive way. That thought is not you, let it go.
Yes. No, I think that is one of the most powerful things that people could learn at a very young age. And it is what we try to teach our kids, even when they're acting out. And it's a time where, our reflex is to want to discipline them in this very hard, abrupt way. And so how we were raised, and you realize like the best thing that we can do in this situation is actually make them aware of what they're feeling right now and why they're acting that way.
Yep.
And yes, there's often a consequence either way because we're parenting. But rather than reacting to the situation and feeding that energy in the first place, it's making them pause and recognize, hey, you're really upset right now. You're really pissed off right now.
Yep.
Where do you feel that?
Yep.
I feel it right here. Do you feel like I was taking that away from you? And that was hurting your heart, hurting your feelings? Yeah. Okay. We can't do that. Here's your consequence. I want you to think about that for a little bit, and just that pause of just registering that awareness in an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they can do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
They absolutely can do it.
I think even younger kids can do it.
Yeah.
And it's so important that you do that with your kids, because when you do that, you're training their neural networks properly. You're training what's called the interoceptive and introspective networks, which are the parts of our brain that live in the insular cortex in the limbic system, which is a system that's very tightly connected to the fear center of the brain and has the ability to shut down the fear center of the brain when it's acting out, when it shouldn't. And interoception is body awareness. Introspection is self-reflection. Okay. And they live in this part of the brain called the insula, right next to the empathy part, which is the last part of the insula. They're right next to each other. In all higher order communal animals. It's very interesting. Dolphins, elephants, humans, bonobo chimpanzees, and a few others. And when you take a child through that process, or you take yourself through that process of body awareness, what am I feeling? Where do I feel in my body? Why do I think I'm feeling that? And you ask yourself those questions, or your child, when you go through that process, you've just trained that what's called it's like, simply put, like a self-reflective loop. And then you're helping rewire synapses in your brain to not only be better at perceiving what's happening in your body and better at perceiving and identifying your emotions, but also better at processing them quickly. And then that helps build resilience, because you're able to bounce back more quickly when that comes up again, because you know what it is now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And speaking of resilience, it's an interesting transition to, do we necessarily want to build a higher resilience baseline, or do we want to feel the feels and just come back to an adequate baseline? You look at, like, athletes are such a good example, and we look at biohacking communities and cold plunging and this and that, like train your resilience. And like, I see validity in that, but I also see the other side where it's like, are we training a stress threshold that's actually just conditioning our body to be okay with the stress? I can say, got back to the metrics, I notice a change in my HRV when I do those things. So I have valuable data, but I also isn't the delta pretty important? Like your ability to spike and then come to baseline versus just I've worked with the special forces guys a lot. And it's so many of those guys, I love them to death. And they just they're awesome. They're amazing to work with, but they have trained themselves to just be here all the time so that the delta is less.
Yeah.
And then when they're not in that scenario, I mean, you've seen it in practice, I'm sure, right? So it's just like you bring them down here and it's just like they can't do it.
Yeah.
So their baseline is just, quite frankly, hard for them to function in civilization outside of that world. So where does that fall in line? Like, where's the balance?
Yeah, so that's not real resilience. That's like what, if you can't come back to base, if you can't come back down and then go back up again, then what happens when you come back from a mission and you have to reintegrate back into civilian life, right? Like this was my major patient population, when I started doing this work on Apollo and studying trauma, was people who trained themselves like you described as, military fighters and et cetera, to go out.
Athletes are probably in a similar category too.
Yeah, a lot of athletes too. And they would just go out and get their threshold be up here, and they could not come back down. And when they had to come back down and rejoin regular civilian life, they really struggled, and many of them became sick and adopted a whole bunch of poor coping strategies to deal with the discomfort of coming back down. For many people, it's the discomfort of going to that stress level that's bad, that's hard for them. For these folks, it's the opposite, right? They're having trouble going back down to baseline, their old baseline. So resilience is actually more what you described. In actuality, it is how quickly and smoothly do we bounce back and forth between different states of demand. Yeah. So it's not just about training yourself to deal with the most. It's how quickly, when stress comes, how quickly does my body react to it and deal with it and solve the problem? And then how quickly does it come back to recovery?
Yeah.
So a lot of these folks that stay up here in the hyper vigilant, hyper stressed region are actually folks that have trained, they have PTSD, like they've trained themselves into a state where they're not what we would describe as like, they don't have the emotional flexibility to be able to maneuver back and forth quickly. Yeah. That's the goal. So resilience is like, it's very, very important because how quickly we bounce back is directly proportionate to our heart rate variability and our vagal tone. So the higher the more vagal tone we have on a general basis, like, and the more, not in a moment, but across the board, and the higher our heart rate variability is, the more that's a predictor that we're more likely to bounce back quickly and respond to stress quickly.
So if you look at hormetic stressors and things that people are doing on purpose, is there sort of a playbook that people can follow when they look at even their HRV to say, like, what the right sort of dose is, the appropriate, dose for the poison, right? Like, it's obviously there's a line, it's like you train too hard, there's a line, but you see that line one time, it's one thing. You see it two times. Like, what's sort of the framework that people can look at? Like, where do they know when their, allostatic load is just too much?
Yeah. I mean, the goal of all of us is to learn to listen to what your body's telling you.
For sure. Yeah.
There isn't a lot of, like, we've written a lot on this. I personally, about HRV and how to train for it and all these things. But I think what we're really talking about in terms of resilience is discomfort tolerance training, right? So think about it this way. When you're uncomfortable with something, doesn't matter what it is, but just say, Nate, what's something that makes you uncomfortable? Cold water, really cold water.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a physical thing. I suppose, long periods of time underwater, right? Like doing that kind of training. Okay.
So that's a little trickier one because you can die in.
Okay, let's just use cold plunge, because if it's I just have done that so often that
it doesn't make
it's kind of fun. So it's not uncomfortable. It is still uncomfortable. So let's just.
But that's a good one though. Yeah. So when you're putting yourself into cold water, and for the early days, right? Mm-hmm. It feels shocking. It feels like really cold water. It feels like uncomfortable. You have an urge to get out right? To not sit through it, but what do? You tell yourself, I'm safe. I'm going to breathe through this. I'm going to do my 1, 2, 3 minutes, and you build up. But you're safe. You're not going to get hurt, right?
Of course, yeah.
That's why you can tolerate the discomfort. It's a safe environment that you've created to tolerate the discomfort with knowing you're not going to harm will not come to you. So what's the opposite of that is discomfort intolerance. So the person who gets into the water and immediately feels the shock of the cold water is like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Right. And they just leave and they take the impulsive action. What have you done by staying in the water? You're training discomfort tolerance and you're preventing or squashing impulsive tendencies. Impulsiveness is like one of our chief vices as human beings is like doing things out of impulse, like seeking instant gratification or instant relief of discomfort. That's what gets us all into trouble. Yeah. That's addiction
in everything.
101. Yeah. Right.
So Alan Watts always says you want to get that goodie.
Yeah.
You hear him say that?
Yeah.
It's like, exactly.
So resilience, when we think about that, resilience is this basic understanding of knowing life is going to be stressful and uncomfortable sometimes. I'm generally going to be safe during those times, but it's going to be uncomfortable at times. I'm going to train myself to be able to tolerate enough discomfort so that I can know when to act and when to wait. So in a lot of ways, resilience is discomfort tolerance training. It's also like body wisdom. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In the body, when stress comes, we are listening. We're so in tune in our new game of where the goal is to be as in tune as possible. In that game, when we have high HRV and good resilience training, when stress comes or a threat comes, we respond before everyone else in the room, right? Like we have already noticed that there's something, like our spidey senses have gone off. There's something in the environment that's changed, right? And we're tuned into it. And then we deal with it maybe in advance. Maybe we take care of it. Like you see, it's probably Navy SEALs all the time where they are so aware of their environment. Mm-hmm. Like they can tell when like a bird lands on the roof of the building that you're in, right? Like or the pattern of the rain changes or anything, right? Like they are just constantly zoned in that stuff. It's very powerful. That's like full optimization of our human functioning around sensation and really making sensation a superpower, because it is. Like we just haven't trained it to be like that in most cases, but it is. And that body wisdom allows us to know, okay, I can trust my body to turn up now or turn down now and do it rapidly, like bouncing back reflexively. So that's what we're training when we're doing that stuff. Not trained to be up here all the time, but like you said, training to be able to shift states smoothly, quickly, without any interruption.
It goes right in line with the discussions I have a lot about the metabolic flexibility piece. It's the same kind of thing. It's like I've always said, my definition of fitness isn't how fast someone can run or what they can do. It's the ability to say, hey, Dave, if you were running up a hill and you got to the top of that hill, how quickly would your body switch back to aerobic metabolism and, ultimately be out of the threat, right? And how long does it take you for your body, possibly how quickly, depending on the scenario, will your body go into anaerobic, right? Yeah. And it's like, if you're still in oxygen debt when you're at the top of the hill and you're, running for a minute after that, that's not good metabolic flexibility. That's not good being able to shift those gears of oxidative phosphorylation and just go back to where. So that's my definition of fitness is like, you look at like a CrossFit athlete, or you look at, and I've had this discussion with Dr. Scher before, which is fascinating. It's like you look at some of the best like CrossFit athletes in the world. They know how to work really hard. And some of the ones that actually win are the ones that actually will flop down, go into some kind of parasympathetic like reset. They'll flop on the ground, they'll diaphragmatically breathe, while the other ones are like schlepping to the next event. And you're like, what's this guy doing? He's laying down. But he's regulating. Mm-hmm. And he's able to have that delta where now he can peak And it's like real fitness isn't necessarily about, depending on the sport, I suppose, but general fitness, that's my definition of it, is the ability to, and it sounds like it's the same thing with the nervous system, same thing with, our HRV, and which is obviously closely tied in. And you mentioned, with some of the tier 1 groups that I've worked with on the special forces side, like, they joke that they have like a magic between them, because someone that is on a breach on one end of an apartment complex and a guy that's still, breaching the door on another entry, they almost can communicate with each other.
It's incredible.
They've talked about it. It's like a telepathy. Like they know what's going on. And I've been lucky enough to be on some ops with these guys that just in training and seeing it and seeing how they can clear a building in like 13 seconds. And it's like, there's no way you can do that without just having all of like senses and beyond to know where, and it's amazing. Now, some of those guys are really good at turning it off and some of them are not. And then you get into the guys like the drone operators where it's just like they're having to be on and then they're having to like go drive back in their car to their family and like hold their 1-year-old kid after they were just like, that's talk about like requiring next level, right? Yeah. So it's funny how this all kind of ties in even with just regular people though.
Yeah.
Because it's the average person is still like stress is kind of relative in some ways, is it not? I mean, it's like someone's perception of stress is probably just as important.
Oh yeah. I mean, perception of stress is fundamental because, right, we've been talking about the problem of stress where we're just talking about stress as one thing and there's just too much of it, too fast, too loud, right? There's just overwhelming amounts of stress. But stress itself is actually two things. It's eustress and distress. Eustress comes from the Latin root good, EU is good. Stress, meaning stress that forces us to grow and become better, stronger, faster versions of ourselves and to adapt and to learn. And then there's distress that makes us sick. And eustress, if there's too much of it, too overwhelming, any kind of stress will turn into distress. But we can shift between eustress and distress by changing our perspective on stress. So if the first thing you ask yourself every time you're challenged with something is why me, or what's wrong with me that I have to face this challenge right now, you've just turned whatever you're going to face into distress by default, because you've made the reason why, you've made an assumption that there's something wrong with you, that you have to overcome this challenge or face this challenge. That is not true. This is just, you've seen the "it happens" shirt, right? Yep. Like, it's not about anything being wrong with you that it happens. It just happens. Yeah. It's up to us to figure out how to adapt to it gracefully as possible. And ideally as quickly and painlessly as possible. So the way to shift that is a tool I use all the time with myself and with my clients is you have to shift the questions you ask. So I have this joke. If you ask it's not really a joke, it's very serious, but I think I like to think of it like a joke because it's kind of funny. So basically, if you ask the wrong questions, you get the wrong answers.
Yeah. So
if you ask yourself, what's wrong with me that this is happening to me? Your brain will actually come up with some suggestions of what's wrong with you.
It's like an effed up version of ChatGPT.
Exactly. It's going to give you some answer back, and it's not going to be one you want, and it's not going to be non-judgmental, right? But if you shift the question to notice that what's happening, notice the challenge, and just say, hey, what can I learn from this today? How is this challenge going to help me grow, right? It's a very different take on stress. And when we think about stress from that perspective first of what am I supposed to be learning from this right now? How can I grow from overcoming this experience right now? Then there's nothing wrong with you, right? You're just going through it and you're going to figure it out and you're going to come out on the other side. There's nothing wrong with you. And when you change that little tiny piece of just what question are you asking of yourself before you take on a stressful thing, you have literally just transformed what stress means with a perspective shift. And it works pretty much every time, as long as you're not completely, utterly inundated.
Yeah.
Right. But it works It really works. I mean, the perspective is everything. It's so important.
I'd imagine this is where, a trauma makes a difference, right? It probably changes that hard wiring to perceiving a threat, even when something's, and we talk about these senses that we may not be aware of that we have. If those things were, even hypothetically, say they have like a big T legit trauma, right? By definition, like a big T trauma. There was X aroma, there was this, there was that.
Yeah.
And then there's all the other things in the information sphere that we were unaware of, maybe just cognitively, but we were getting input from. It would make sense that even those inputs that we were unaware of, if you get exposed to them again, could trigger a reaction, which would almost make it seem like it was out of the blue or but maybe there's something out there. That's probably what makes it very difficult. It's because something could trigger someone, but then that's talking big T stuff. I think, not everyone experiences that, but I think everyone experiences some level of little T, not getting picked for the soccer team or, things that maybe affected them. But is it a sum of all the parts with that? Like when you have even lots of just little traumatic things that stack up, and maybe you're more hardwired for stress in the sense that your home environment as a child never made you feel safe. So those little things push you over the edge more.
Yeah.
Does that affect this whole system? In terms of how you perceive your stress or perceive your thoughts?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trauma in general, I don't like to think about, I get the purpose for this conversation. I tend not to think about it as big T, little t, because it's really about the impact that the T
It's
has.
condescending in a way.
A little bit,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's not as much about.
I know it's clinical. They have the big T and the little t.
Yeah, and we talked about it like that for so long, but I think it's really about, Gabor Mate?
Mm-hmm.
Gabor talks about it from the perspective that I really like, which is it's not about the size of the T. It's about the impact that T has on our bodies. Yeah. So one interesting example is that he uses is when a mother, a parent at home is stressed out and they yell at their child for singing. Mm-hmm. And then they tell the child to shut up. And the child's 1 or 2, and they're just learning to find their voice. And all of a sudden, they're like, "What? My parents don't like my voice? Is there something wrong with my voice? I'm not supposed to use my voice." And your voice is something very personal. We use it all the time, right? Especially in adult life. So if that is not addressed, then that starts to build a sense of fractured self-trust because there's something wrong with you. It's your voice, and the voice is important. But regardless of what it is, there's something wrong with you. And if there's something wrong with you, then, and you believe, are taught to believe that there's something wrong with us, which then can be further reinforced by future events, then we start to feel like the victim of circumstance rather than the chooser of circumstance.
Yeah.
So when we're in a state where we perceive ourselves to be victims, things happen to us. Stress happens to me. Why is this happening to me? What's wrong with, we start to ask the question. The questions come quite naturally when you're in a victim mindset. It's like, why is this happening to me? Common question. We've all asked it. I've asked it at times, why, what did I do to deserve this? Yeah. Right? But those kinds of questions are the very, very wrong questions. They are very reasonable questions to ask, and we completely understand why people ask them. We've all asked them. But we have to recognize as soon as possible, those are not the questions to ask, because even though they were inspired by victimhood from the past event that happened, they are also reinforcing of it.
Yeah.
And we don't want to reinforce the problem. We want to recognize that there's a hurting victim there. There's a person who sees themselves as a victim. They're not a victim, but they see themselves as a victim, and they're hurting, and they need support for their vulnerability to be held and heard and seen through a process where they feel safe enough to remake meaning around the events that result in them seeing themselves as less than themselves.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Of course. Yeah. So without dismissing the fact that they feel like a victim while also not encouraging them in a loving way to somehow not dwell on the victimhood in the present moment.
Right.
Because when you dismiss the victim,
Can't dismiss
that's like the worst thing.
That's the worst. They'll shut down.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we have to remind people who are in this victim state in subtle ways that of like situations or things they can do that completely contradict the sense of victimhood. So if victimhood means that I am, or implies that like I see myself as a victim of circumstance, things happen to me, right? Then how do you fix that? Well, you show somebody that they can make things happen, right? And it's really that simple, but it requires a lot of time to gently meet people where they are, and then sort of help handhold them so through the process of remembering, because we've all done it at one point, remembering the power of their choices, which includes not just free will, but free won't, which is one of the most important things that we don't do enough of, is actually say no.
Yeah.
As a way of exercising our choice. But that's power.
That is power. Yeah. That is power.
And psychedelic medicines are so interesting because they help us to accelerate that healing process. That healing process from past trauma was so difficult and frustrating because it used to take sometimes like a lifetime. And now we can rapidly accelerate people into those states of safe vulnerability to remake meaning using these psychedelic tools that are legal and available in the case of ketamine. So,
yeah. Ketamine was a game changer for me. It was an absolute game changer for me. Just being able to, I'd say being very deliberate with the integration period afterwards too, during that neuroplastic window. I can legit say that I changed my brain.
Yeah.
Like I changed my brain. And it was, the shutting down of the DMN was great, but it gave me a safe perspective to be able to, for lack of a better way of saying it, and this could actually be in some ways dismissive to some, but it's like, maybe I don't have agency over everything that's happening to me, which shouldn't be misconstrued with your actions don't have consequences. However, but seeing it like that gave me this space to be able to say, wait a minute, there's a good chance that we're just energy spun into matter. And maybe I don't have agency and these thoughts aren't me. And I give myself the space from that. Then with the neuroplastic window, it changed how I look at everything. Like it changed how I looked at body composition and why I felt the need to be 5% body fat all the time and run my body through the ringer. And it allowed me to operate from a place of love versus a place of hate and still do the things that I enjoy, like working out.
That's great.
Let's get into that for a second. What's happening with ketamine specifically? Obviously we have, shutting down the DMN, but what is happening? Is there an effect on the amygdala as well, or is it really just DMN?
No, it's pretty whole brain.
Yeah.
It's
flooding with glutamate essentially, right?
The ketamine is really interesting because the molecular action of how we get from ketamine is a unique psychedelic medicine, and the way we get from molecule to perceive to experience that people have is not fully understood.
Okay.
It acts on so many different receptors.
Yeah,
it has opiate receptor binding, glutamate, lots of stuff going on with ketamine. But it is very powerful at inducing a state that we describe in psychology that's kind of called like observer mind, where you can just kind of non-judgmentally observe, watch yourself doing whatever it is you're doing, which is usually just resting, listening to some music, but you can watch yourself without judgment. And that, like when our minds are constantly spinning up thoughts or interacting with thoughts all the time for years, which most of us are, very, very busy, very active minds. And then you take something or do something, because you can access this with this state of observer mind with meditation too, or breathing. But in the case of ketamine, you take ketamine and you access a state and your mind all of a sudden quiets for the first time in as long as you can remember. And it's incredibly profound for people because they can just sit there and, again, feel safe enough to just observe, not pick out every imperfection, not criticize, not analyze, not judge. Just observe what is. And when you observe what is, you usually come to the conclusion pretty quickly that everything is actually okay or pretty darn great, because you feel safe with your body and yourself again. And so that becomes a really powerful trauma therapy, because trauma inherently is, like, if you think about trauma like breaking a bone, except the broken bone in trauma is self-trust. Yes. So a big part of what we're doing with people is we're working with them to clean that wound, to like go back and see and like visualize it like a wound. And like, what do you do with a broken leg? When you go to the ER, right? When you get a bad injury, they open it up and they clean it out and it hurts. And then they put traction on it and do surgery and like bring the bones back together, and that hurts. And then they sew it up and that hurts more, but you don't have a scar and you have a working leg afterwards, right? So it's, when we think about it, like emotional trauma wounds like that, it makes it a lot easier to fix them, because that's what we're doing. We're doing the same process, basically. We're just doing it with, to prevent an emotional scar instead of a physical scar.
And ketamine's not, I mean, it's not a classical psychedelic in that sense. I mean, I suppose it is, but it's not like, it's not serotonergic or anything. So
it's one of the more atypical psychedelic compounds.
It's when you see those scenarios where, a lot of people have seen like the Netflix documentaries and looked at that, let's take a peek behind the curtain of like psilocybin for a minute. What's happening there, and why does like a positive allosteric modulator or something that's going to like influence serotonin that way, why does that cause the brain to change? Like what's happening? Let's talk mechanistically first, because I'm kind of interested there. I mean, obviously, 5-HT2A, but what's happening? That's the cascade after that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wish we had more answers. I'll give you what I know. So 5-HT2A receptors, which are the major serotonin receptor that gets activated by psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, and most of the common psychedelics that we use in therapy are all working through that receptor site. And that receptor site is really important, 5-HT2A, because there's a lot of studies that have come out that strongly suggest that receptor is critical for meaning making about the world. And in some of these studies, they gave people in a like double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled setting, they gave people psilocybin or LSD or a drug that orally blocks 5-HT2A. And in the people that got the drug that blocked 5-HT2A, they had no observable shift to them or to the people who were watching them in meaning of anything. But when they took the psilocybin or LSD alone, everything was brighter. Every song sounded new, right? Like they were new interpretations from everything. Like the meaning shift was dramatic. Yeah. And that's really interesting because psilocybin and LSD both have some binding affinity to the receptor, 5-HT2A receptor itself, but most of the binding is on the side of the receptor at a site called the allosteric site. Yeah. And so what that does is it's changing the shape of the receptor just slightly so that it clamps onto serotonin more tightly and for longer. So taking a step back, what is one of the most common side effects of SSRIs that we know?
More depression.
Well, so it's very close because it's not exactly more depression, it's numbness, apathy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, like right? Prozac, they're just numb. Yeah.
Yeah. So that can lead to people saying also, like, I still feel depressed, but usually
don't feel anything.
Usually they don't feel anything. what is numbness? What is apathy? It's meaninglessness, right?
I get you. Yep.
So why does that happen? It happens because the 5-HT, and this is what LSD and psilocybin kind of teach us with the combination of what we're learning from SSRIs and the side effects, is that the 5-HT2A receptor facilitates the downstream reaction appears to facilitate this downstream reaction that results in meaning making, to include all these other neurotransmitters involved, like dopamine and glutamate and everything else, when it's activated as a burst, not constantly activated at low levels, which is what SSRIs do. When you constantly activate the receptor at low levels, the receptor says, I'm overstimulated all the time, and it starts to withdraw.
Yeah.
So you get less receptors, less sensitive receptors. That's not what we want with serotonin. We want maximizing sensitivity, and we want to maximize burst activation, because activating the receptor in a burst and having strong short-term activation is what results in people saying, like the people in the psilocybin and MDMA trials that said, that experience was the single most meaningful experience of my entire life. And these people are in their like 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're saying that, and they've already lived a whole life. And they're saying that one dose with one medicine was the most meaningful experience they've ever had in their lives. We get there because those drugs are specifically creating burst activation at that receptor. When that receptor experiences burst activation, which can also come from just regular, natural, awe-inspiring experiences, the downstream from that, we don't understand all of it, but what we understand for the most part is that new memories are formed by creating more synaptic connections between different neurons that are all connecting parts of the brain that associate, assuming, I'm going to say for the purposes of this topic, positive memory formation, things that are like fulfilling, joyful, meaningful in that way, that you start to associate what you're doing and the parts of your brain that are connecting what you're doing with your self-identity part, like medial prefrontal cortex, with the insular cortex that's storing all your emotional memories and experiences. And then there's a loop network there that networks with the amygdala that says, hey, if we can feel this way, we're not under threat right now, take a break, amygdala. Yeah. Right. And so then that learning is not just happening on the level of the neurons, it's happening in the parts of the brain talking to each other better. It's also happening in those individual nerve cells in the epigenetic code.
Okay.
So the code is storing the information about that thing being positively meaningful, or in the case of trauma, fear training, right? Negatively meaningful. And that gets stored on the epigenetic code. So that goes back to like the cortisol thing we were talking about previously. And one thing that's really, really interesting about that is we did a study with MDMA with MAPS as a collaboration, where we wanted to figure out if trauma is fear learning, and that induces these cortisol receptor dysfunction, methylation issues that result in a less properly functioning cortisol receptor in PTSD. If we give those people MDMA assisted therapy, will that help repair the cortisol receptor when their symptoms get better? Will there be alignment between how much their symptoms get better and what their cortisol receptor methylation looks like? Yeah. Is it really as above, so below, right? And it was. We actually saw, and this is with a study in collaboration with MAPS. So we saw an Arizona State University and a USC Sinai. It's a big group. And we were able to show that when you look at the MAPS phase 3 study research participants, and you look at them, their epigenetic code for cortisol receptor before they take MDMA and 12 weeks later after their last dose and their last therapy session, that there is a statistically significant shift in the amount of methylation on that one part of the cortisol receptor that was implicated in trauma. And the more better they got, the more their clinical symptoms improved, the more change there was.
Holy crap.
Right? So that not only shows traumas were fully reversible, down to the epigenetic code. We can change the epigenetic memory of trauma.
That means you can potentially change like generational trauma.
Exactly.
At an epigenetic level.
And we have never known that was possible before.
That is insane.
So that's why a lot of this is so cool from the perspective of like, a new way to approach healing, particularly with mental illness, learn behavior, because it's all connected, right? Then you can understand, once you look at the epigenetic pathway of like, oh, this is starting as an experience, but then the meaningfulness of it in whatever way is getting stored on my genetic code and changing my gene expression up and down. You can see the connection between cortisol, right? You can see the connection between visceral fat. You can start to trace those pathways from how do I get from like the cortisol receptor methylation to every other thing that starts to dysfunction in the
Dude,
body.
that's crazy. Because I mean, you're literally talking, like if you've got, a mother and a grandmother that had a higher, risk of visceral fat and metabolic conditions that are also related to this in many ways. We don't have the concrete, I guess, deliberate data there, but it's suggesting that even some of these physiological, like metabolic conditions that are potentially genetic, like can be disrupted. Mm-hmm. Because that is wild all through the brain.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. It's like a new era of science that we're just now coming to. It's very exciting. And I think you use the word genetic, so I just want to make sure that everybody who's listening knows that we're not talking about genetic disorders. Genetic means in the DNA, and the DNA cannot be changed, nor do we want it to be changed. That when DNA changes on the fly, that's when we get cancer. Yeah. Right. So we do not want our DNA to change. Most of these metabolic issues, I would argue, are actually epigenetic. Yeah. And then they're stored on the DNA. And that is the most beautiful part of the story, and the most hopeful part of the story that we're talking about is that genetics, if you tell people it's in their genes, you were born with it, it cannot be changed. Genetics do not change in the course of our lives. They're supposed to stay the same for our entire being. Epigenetics can be changed. So the new knowledge about how information is stored in the epigenetic layer, telling the genes that are already there to turn up or down differently, and that we have control over that with our actions, is extremely hopeful.
It's so... probably know, because she's up in the Bay Area too, Dr. Lucia Aronica. She's the epigeneticist. Yeah. I mean, she's interesting.
UCSF, right?
Yeah. She's interesting. She's awesome. But I mean, I had her on the channel like a year ago, and just, I mean, I've always thought epigenetics was wild. But I mean, the stuff that she was, I mean, just these things that can be passed through pregnancy, through like all these, like, and your diet literally can affect this too. But it can, like, all the way down to how your body essentially interprets signals from food, right? So it's like, and so much of this is probably tying right back to those big 6 things you talked about from a survival perspective. If you change these simple things, the one thing that has you change the meaning and how you look at something that turns off a fear response to, whatever, name a million things. Yeah. Little t, big T, doesn't matter. Like things that are affecting your operating system. Yeah. And you're downstream changing, like breaking a cycle that's not only going to change your life physically and mentally, but literally can change like, an unborn child and change the trajectory of their life. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, my dad was always nervous about this too. My dad always had anxiety surrounding this, or, it's like you say, oh, it just runs in the family.
Right. And we don't even realize what we're saying, what the meaning of that is when we say it. Like we don't realize that, like, we're just saying, oh, I'm destined to be this way.
Have you seen, you probably have, because this is really interesting, the study on, with anorexia nervosa, with, I believe it was ketamine and, I don't know, I can't remember if it was dietary induced ketogenesis or if it was exogenous ketones. Have you seen that? No. Because ketones are a very powerful histone deacetylase inhibitor.
Oh, interesting.
So you have that HDAC effect. And I believe it was dietary. It was the most successful anorexia intervention of all time.
Wow.
Which was ketamine combined with ketones. And it's interesting. And I was talking to Dr. Dom D'Agostino about this. And it was just like, we don't have a lot of literature on. That's like one of the only things that we have with like the intersect of even, a non-classical psychedelic, but there's pretty much nothing on a classical psychedelic along with the histone deacetylation effect of like a ketone. Yeah. Which, because we know from the literature that there's, neuroplastic effects of being in a ketogenic state, all this stuff. Like imagine, are you aware of anything that's on the horizon with that? I just, given that's the world that I'm in, like I'm in such that ketone world, and have been for a decade, I'm just waiting for that to happen because I just feel in my gut that there's something there. There's an intersect there.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're at the infancy of that, right? Like we still only have one legal psychedelic medicine.
Yeah.
Federally legal. Cannabis may be the second one.
Yeah.
Right. But we're like, until we get to a point where we can, where the federal government like reschedules other psychedelics like MDMA and psilocybin and allows us, the scientists who spend our lives to try to figure this stuff out so we can make people better, able to be able to study these in the lab, which we can't right now.
Yeah.
Well, ketamine is like the only one that we can study because it's legal. We aren't going to be able to figure those out with any reliability. It's probably going to happen in some other country before it happens here. But again, I think it's very promising to see that someone has started to do that work with ketamine, because I think when we look at different, like what you just described, the results showed, right? Like if you're giving somebody something that increases the malleability of the epigenetic code, and then you give somebody something that gives them the opportunity to revise the meaning that's stored on that code, then you would expect them to have better response.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that it's incredibly exciting to hear that could be used for anorexia. That's really awesome.
Not to mention that, there's ketones can increase the crossing of the blood-brain barrier by 300%. So potentially even being able to do, I don't think ketamine is horrendously hepatotoxic, but it's like being able to get more done with less, right? Which in my opinion should always be a goal, right? Yeah. Do the most with the least. Like if you can use less of a medicine, by all means, like even in a single, journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so fascinating. I want to go a little bit into the realm of just consciousness for a second, because it's just a fun discussion. I know we talked about it a little bit, but it's fun. And random question, and I just want to hear your opinion because nobody knows. Do you think that consciousness exists outside the human body? Or is it just a sum of all parts?
That's a good question. I think that consciousness is inclusive of us, but it also exists outside the human body. Yeah. I think when we are not here, there is still consciousness. The earth is conscious.
Yeah.
Plants are conscious. We just don't think about them like that in Western society. But if you talk to indigenous people, they treat plants like people who are conscious. It's a very different experience around eating them.
It's so true.
So I don't think it's like a tree falls in a forest, doesn't make sound kind of situation. Like I think then we're getting away from the prior like Descartian narcissistic approach to consciousness is manufactured here and the rest of the world, be damned. Or the universe. I think it's actually starting to come back to, I also talk about this in the book because I think it's very interesting to see like what do indigenous cultures have to teach us about this thinking.
Yeah, for sure.
I think they've been doing it for a lot longer than we have. While we've been focused on our race for accumulation, they've been focused on being in tune.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that, to answer your question, I think consciousness is possibly universal in that the universe could be conscious, but it certainly exists beyond us. We're just a part of it.
Yeah.
And we can participate in it and we have it, but it's shared.
Yeah. One consciousness that perhaps our organism is just the interpretation of it in a way, right? It can send you down whatever rabbit holes, lose your mind on it if you really want to, but it's also extremely liberating. You think of it like that. So I tend to agree, where I think there's an interesting bridge, and you're doing a good job of this. And it's why I was so excited to talk to you in the first place, because there is a bridge between Eastern and Western that I think we need to stop just shunning one or the other. Yeah. There's people like the Eastern side has so much amazing stuff that we could learn from here. Like what you said, like we've been just in this race for accumulation. We also have some really cool stuff on the Western side, and we have tools and we have data and we have like, if these two sides could
we can save your life if you're about to die.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Eastern medicine sucks at that.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So there's and it's like, there's not a thoughtful acknowledgement of that Eastern side on most of the Western side. It gets totally poo-pooed, and it sucks because I think if those two sides could talk, like we're starting to see it in some of the quantum stuff, right? Like we're starting to see like, oh, wait a minute. Some of what Eastern culture has been talking about forever is actually backed. Like there's
quantum physics.
There's actually some legit stuff here. Now, if we start looking at the side of physiology with it, and it's tough to talk about because you have to introduce it delicately, but it's like, wait a minute. I think you put it nicely. We've been focused on a race to accumulation. What makes that the right thing versus another culture that's been, maybe they're in a race to connection. Mm-hmm. Still a race. It's just like if you silo them off, they're just segregated, but like which one's right, which one's wrong, right? And maybe we have a lot to learn from that side, and it can help us. I mean, if you really wanted to, sure, it might help you with accumulation if you want to spin it that way.
There are people who go down and take ayahuasca to accumulate more stuff when they come back. That's
a good point. How do I get better at my business? Yes. Or how do I get better? So I'm hoping to have an aha moment so that I can make more money. Or, all the wrong intent. Which surrounding intent, actually, do you feel that humans can feel intent? Do you believe that humans can feel intent?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Intention is like one of our most fundamentally important skills.
So you think when you feel like an eerie vibe, everyone's experienced that, right?
Oh, you mean like intuition?
Well, not necessarily intuition, but intent, like positive, negative intent. Not necessarily intuition, but someone's like, even what their actual intent is at that moment, right?
Oh, when you're detecting it from someone else.
Yes.
You detect it from someone else.
And do you think that that's just something that maybe we've lost touch with and that we can feel that?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We have absolutely the ability to feel that. I was not that great at it. I trained to do it in training, in my medical training. We learn to see through people when they're talking about themselves, to know when somebody's lying, know when somebody's telling the truth, know when somebody's telling partial truth. Are they have intent to heal? Do they have intent to go back out and do something crazy? Who knows?
Yeah.
Right. But the point, or something harmful to themselves. So some of it can be trained. I would argue a lot more of it can be trained than I originally thought.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it is really about listening, like going back to before, like what data points are you basing your information on? Are you basing your information or your decision to want to hang out with this person that your partner thinks has malintent because they're telling you they're going to give you a bunch of stuff to add to your accumulation pile afterwards? Or is it because you actually think this person has your best interest at heart?
Yeah.
Right? Because if your partner is like, maybe this person has malintent, they might be sensing that because they're not distracted by the shiny object that the person says they're going to give you.
True. Yeah.
Right? And distraction is really the enemy.
Yeah.
Like if focused attention is the goal, because that's where like all of our power lives, is being able to like focus our attention at any moment, then distraction is the enemy. So we need to recognize distraction very quickly and step away from it and take our attention back. And if attention times time equals concentration, when you pay attention to something we were talking about earlier, or concentrating it over time in your body, in your consciousness, because you're giving it more of your attention over time, it's the gateway to your conscious awareness. So you focus on something for a long time, the more of it comes in, becomes concentrated. Intention times time equals manifestation. Yeah. So intention is our human energy output. It's what we actually intend for the goal of a situation. It's energy. So as another human being who's sensitive to energy, if you're tuned into somebody and you're listening, you can feel somebody's intent.
Yeah.
Because they're outputting it.
Yeah.
Literally. Even if their actions show something totally different, even if their words show something totally different, you can feel it.
Yeah.
And you can, not everybody has learned how, but you can. And usually it's your intuition that will tell you that.
Okay.
Your intuition is the part of you that is the part of you that's like the voice, the you inside you. It's like, this is the me outside me, and there's the me inside me, which is my intuitive self. And we all have one. And it communicates to us in our own voice, and we'll say things that we usually don't believe because we don't have science to say that is true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the debate. And that's why Western, Eastern, and tribal medicine have been at odds for so long, centuries, is because most of Eastern and Western, or Eastern and tribal approaches, you can't just see. You can't just prove them with science. So the holistic approach to medicine, really what I argue is like where medicine must go and is going in some ways in already, but must go fully into the 21st century for us to actually be able to heal, is medicine has to exist at the intersection between Eastern, Western, and tribal cultures. It's not exclusive to any of them. Western medicine sucks at treating chronic illness. We're terrible at treating chronic illness. So bad, right? But we're great at saving your life in a crisis. Eastern and tribal medicine, they're going to have a really hard time saving your life in a crisis, but they're great at preventative medicine and they're great at treating chronic illness and mental illness. So it sounds like they fill a gap that we need and we fill a gap that they need. Let's meet in the middle.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the approach that we're really trying to take.
No, I'm so with you on that. And it's the same with, well, I mean, you could segregate fitness, I suppose, but I mean, if you put it into that same category, it's the same thing. It's like you look at, I can never remember his name, but it's like that, what is he, the Norwegian sprinter right now? I think he's just like crazy. And he, like some of like, even though that's technically Western, it's just such a different approach. Like, and you see it in some of these other cultures, how they just will dominate in these like individual sports where their philosophies surrounding like recovery and surrounding are so wildly different than here. And it makes sense. So you say like Western medicine's good at saving your life. Western everything is good at like acute, hard, fast life, death.
Exactly.
Like that's
our
what we are,
expertise.
you know? It's like, so sure, we can make someone bigger, faster, stronger for like a shorter period of time. And then we can probably fix it when their heart gives out from all whatever drugs they're taking to get there. Like Western medicine fixes the Western disease that we have created for ourselves in many ways. Mm-hmm. It's like, there was a very wise friend of mine that, you know, he's a physician and he's trained in kind of both sides. And he's just like, you know, you can't expect, like the Western disease is very hard to get treated by the Eastern and vice versa, because this is the Western disease and there's almost like he called it like a detox period when someone like leaves that, you know, because there's a period where like it's a square peg in a round hole. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. But it's like, if you come back to the performance side, like some of these, they optimize completely different things. They prioritize like recovery, and you look at their training volumes and you'd be like, that's ridiculously low. Like, how are you winning? Well, I guess we can do it better, right? We just work harder and harder and harder and harder. Yeah, we don't, you know, and sometimes we do for a short period of time, but it's so interesting because it's not just in medicine, it's in sports, but then the big one is the quality of life. Like, what are you actually looking at? And if you ask most people in the West, like how their quality of life is, not going to be too great.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I just tie it back. It goes back to like the reason why these polarities exist and the dichotomy of having A versus B, Western versus Eastern approaches, different, you know, workout approaches seemingly at odds with each other, is because the amygdala is a contrast detection engine. Yeah. So it's not blasting off saying I'm under threat because I'm a Western doctor and somebody's presenting Eastern approaches to me that I should be considering. It's blasting off saying this is new and different. Yeah. When we're safe and we've established that our you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is met, right? Our 6 core survival needs are met. When that is the case, newness and diversity of ideas, including everything we were just talking about, is enriching.
Yeah.
Profoundly enriching. It makes our lives so much better to see where those ideas interface safely without feeling defensive or afraid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Because it's highly neuroplastic with novelty as well, right? Like,
right.
It should be.
But the opposite is also true, which is that when we're stressed out and afraid at baseline, we're already even if all those 6 needs are met, but we perceive one of them to not be met, and then we're faced with newness, diversity, it automatically triggers the amygdala to signal threat. So you see it all the time in that's racism.
Yeah.
Right? That's racism. In a neurobiological context.
Yeah.
If you're safe, like people of other races and cultures, it's like, hey, I want to learn about your food.
Yeah,
I want to learn
right.
about what you do, like your dance moves. Like let's hang out, right? Like I want to learn about your knowledge. As soon as you introduce stress, fear, uncertainty, like at baseline, and people aren't feeling safe to go into those interactions, all of a sudden people are like, oh, you look different than me, I'm scared.
That's a good point.
Right? Too much newness. Right? So that's why, as I know, now I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's because we just don't talk about safety enough. And Maslow mentioned that in the 50s, and it was mentioned by Hippocrates thousands of years before that. And we still ignore the importance of safety first. It's not boring; it's essential.
No, man. It's even like the top mobility experts, the top physical therapists for like the most elite athletes in the world. Like they talk about it for the physical body all the time. Like your body needs to feel safe in this range of motion, right?
Yeah, right.
Like
right.
we hear about that. So we know it even logically to be true.
Yeah.
But we can't wrap our minds around like mental safety because it's hard to measure for most people, right? Like anyone can measure their hip mobility to a degree. Oh, cool. Look, I have better range of motion with my hip. Ah, cool. Well, okay. Proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation and teaching that muscle teaching that hip capsule that it's okay in that position. Nervous system says you're safe here. Yeah. So now you can do it. It's so painfully obvious, but when people don't have like that data to look at, it's part of the concern I have sometimes with science, right? It's just like by the time you do have something, sometimes it's 10, 15 years beyond, right? And then you're on to the next thing.
But what if there's still data? What if it's just not, we're limited by the technology we have to visualize it, but the information is there. It's just in the intuition.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So there's a certain acknowledgement that has to happen definitely for us to like get to our next, sustain ourselves on this earth right now as humans, but definitely to get to the next level where we afford our intuition the same validity as what we see in data, right?
Yeah.
Data is not any visual representations lie to us all the time. Our intuition doesn't lie, but we trust visual representations more than we trust our own intuition.
Do you think if someone that's in a, it's hard because, MDMA is not, it's scheduled, so you can't but I mean, in the trials and based on what you know from the mechanisms, when the amygdala is shut down and PFC is lit up in the case of MDMA, is your intuition shining louder and clearer, even though it's an empathogen that's maybe giving you a distorted sense of everything's copacetic, feeling good?
Oh yeah, your intuition is like, but I don't know if it's louder. It's not. I don't know if it's like louder in that it's amplified. I think that the noise is turned off.
Yeah.
So like the noise that would be otherwise distracting us from hearing it, from listening to our intuition, is turned way, way, way down by the molecular action of MDMA. And when someone is guided to close their eyes, go inside, listen to what comes up.
Yeah.
Oh, you have a question that came up. Ask the question of yourself. What comes up as a response? Then it's profoundly clear what's happening in the interaction. But I mean, it can be confusing for people, but it's not fabricated.
Yeah.
Do you
Okay.
know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I just, with it being an empathogen and creating a warm and fuzzy feeling, wasn't sure if it's the, is that, I guess what I'm saying is that probably more accurate to true nature, like the true intuition and that true nature than someone that's not on that molecule.
I mean, it might be more accurate to, it's a tough question to answer. It might be. Okay. It might be more accurate as a representation of what your intuition was like as a child.
There you go. That's a good way to put it.
But your intuition is, our intuition, each of us has that inside of us, and it's always there. And so I think what psychedelic medicines help with so much, and why so many people have intuitive insight on psychedelic medicines, is because they quiet the mind enough to be able to hear the inner voice. And when we're present in the moment and not so focused on the past or the future or stress or stuff that's not happening right now, then we're able to be more in tune with what is happening right now. And one of the things that's happening right now and right now is your inner voice your intuition's there, like waiting for us to listen so that it can give us information, like the downloads you were talking about earlier. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is like, a lot of the practices that are really helpful for people are actually like noise canceling practices. That's how Apollo works, because it just, like you tried it earlier, right? And you notice the change in your tension in your body and your
vagal tone totally changed. Yeah. I feel it. Yeah.
And so like Apollo works by inducing a state of heightened vagal tone by stimulating the touch receptors of the body. And then when your body is being touched in that way, just like when you get a hug on a bad day, your amygdala turns down because your emotional cortex, the insula, is flooded with positive sensation and associations from a hug or from being touched nicely. And then that tells the amygdala, hey, if I have time to pay attention to this right now, I can't possibly be running from a bear or a lion because you wouldn't let me. Yeah. Right? The amygdala evolved to not allow any other part of the brain to take over unless we're safe. But it gets tricked because it's hundreds of millions of years old. It hasn't adapted to modern society. So a lot of it is like, how do we cancel the noise, right? Like, how do we literally turn, you can almost like, visualization is so powerful. I think of like, how do you visualize like turning the volume down on the noise, the background noise? And then once you turn it down, what's left, right?
Yeah.
So I think the trick is, that's how a big part of healing is, how do we rebuild self-trust? We rebuild self-trust by learning to listen to our intuition and then trust it, because it's always been there for us. And the denial that our intuition is there, the denial that our intuition is useful, the denial that it's real, that we should interact with it on a regular basis or listen to it, is like one of the core self-deceptions that we have as human beings, in large part because of science mistaught it.
I was just going to say.
Right?
Yep.
But that self-deception prevents us from being human.
Yeah.
Prevents us from being ourselves, because we spend our whole lives trying to figure out if it's real or not.
Yeah. Waiting for the next RCT to show us that this is real.
Right.
And then until that RCT comes out, I'm just going to believe that I'm the center of the universe, and that this is, it's so dang fascinating. It's
kind of like an episode of, it's an episode of like Curb Your Enthusiasm or something.
Yeah, it really is.
It's like absurd to a degree.
Yes. No, it is, man. If the amygdala chills out, let me back up and say, does the amygdala essentially like kick you out of ever accessing those traumas in a meaningful way? Like, so, because I've heard situations with MDMA pulling up repressed memories, right? Happens, I guess, somewhat frequently. I think it's kind of like
all psychedelics.
Yeah. It's like, I never even knew that happened to me as a child, or, I've got some very close family members where that's happened. And it's, so the amygdala is kind of like kicking you out of ever accessing that. Have you seen in like the clinicals, just one dose changing that, where like once you're able to access it, I guess you could almost poke holes and say, like, once you're able to access it, can it actually be destabilizing if someone's accessed like a repressed memory, or, and that's probably where like why this is so important that it's done in like
Therapy.
the real scenario. Because I could imagine like all of a sudden, like the amygdala says, hey, you're safe. Go ahead and take a peek behind the curtain.
Whoops.
And in many ways, done right, you could deal with that, right? Yeah. So I could just imagine like with someone that's just going to go, I'm going to go pop some MDMA. You're putting yourself in a pretty vulnerable spot, potentially.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, you just categorize like 50% of my clients are people who have had repressed trauma come up in unpredictable situations when recreationally using psychedelics or using them with, people who they thought might have been trained, but actually weren't very well trained.
Yeah.
But yes, that absolutely happens. And it's not that the amygdala is kicking us out normally. It's that it's protecting us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It thinks that its job, that part of the brain's job, is like to protect us from harm, protect us from pain. But when it does it in a way that is attributing threat to things that aren't actually threatening, then it can actually prolong and recapitulate pain. It can like perpetuate it.
Yeah.
Because it has to be trained. It's a part of the brain. It needs to be trained properly. Our brains are like giant automation machines. They're like the fanciest automation of actual intelligence ever. Like, I find people are so funny because like AI has its uses, but we're so focused on AI, we're missing like the beauty of the actual eye.
Yeah. Yeah. right.
And like the actual eye can automate anything, and it can do it rapidly, and it can expand and contract time, and like we can do so many different things with our brains, and we spend most of it automating that doesn't even matter or help us in any way. It actually makes our lives worse because we're not doing it intentionally. Our intention is about getting more stuff, not automating the right things that make our lives better.
How do we streamline when we have that, like the ultimate capabilities in our own mind, right? If we had hours to go into this, I'd love to talk about time, but like time being elastic and how it's like, we have at least a little bit to talk about actually, because I'm curious on like psychedelic compounds. There's time dilation, like there's things change. So time is essentially elastic. I was on a hike with Andrew Huberman yesterday, and he was talking about, because one thing that I can say for certain is his wheelhouse is definitely stuff related to the retina, right? Say what you want about him. People like him, people don't like him. When you get him talking about the eye, that's definitely his wheelhouse. Yeah. And he was explaining how looking off into the distance actually changes your time dilation a little bit, because you're in your position in space and time. If you're looking off into the distance, time is going to change. Versus looking at something close up, and like if you're in travel, right? Yeah. I'm not an expert in time, but what is happening like on MDMA, or probably less so ketamine, but more so these like classical psychedelics? Why is time changing, and how come for some people it's shrinking and some people it's dilation, and it's
it's all of them that do this. Yeah. All psychedelic medicines do this, and we have the ability to do it through experience, like awe.
True.
Right. Through breath. When you breathe fast, and when you breathe quickly, fast breathing, you make time feels more fast. And when we breathe slower and deeper, time feels more slow. So it's not like, you can literally try this. Anyone listening can try this without any drugs right now if they wanted to. But the idea is that Einstein talked about how time is both linear and relative. So by linear, we mean the traditional sense of time, which is that 1 second follows the previous second, which follows the previous 2 seconds, and the next one follows the previous 3 seconds, and it just keeps going, and each amount of time between each second is the same. Einstein also showed that that's the way that we understand time in most respects. Einstein showed that time is also relative, meaning that our perception of time shifts depending on the motion and the gravity of the person observing the observer, which is like our perspective. So when you think about that in the context of psychedelics, psychedelic medicines, and any like let's talk about psychedelic experiences, which are experiences where our minds are revealed to us. They don't require drugs. We have them in dreams. We have them in meditations. We have them in orgasm. We have them all the time. These states are states of hyper-presentness. Hyper-presentness. That much more of us is here now. So if normally 20% of us is here now, 80% is in the past and the future, and only 20% of us is here now taking in information in the here and now. And then you take a psychedelic medicine or you enter a profound, deep meditative state or shavasana after yoga, and you instantly feel more present. You're now, let's call it like, let's say you achieve 100%, right? One time, you're 100% present. That means 100% of you, 80, more than that, it's 5 times more of you than before is present in the moment now. So what happens when more of you is present in the moment? You're able to take in more information. You're able to listen to more that's going on in the present moment. So you're able to pull in when you have 5 times more of you here than now than there was 10 minutes ago. You're able to take in 5 times as much information. That means it seems, and you're also able to observe how much more information there is because there's more of you here to observe it.
Yeah.
Right. So when you start to realize how much there is in the present moment, and which is infinite, and you are able to bring all of yourself, or as much of yourself as possible, to observe it and be there with it, then your attention and your consciousness are so enwrapped in what's happening that you effectively, like, time, what we call dilates, like it expands and slows, the perception of it slows down and doesn't pass as fast because there's more stuff happening. Not more stuff like more responsibilities, more thoughts, more stress. The opposite. It's more stillness.
Yeah.
It's like we're observing the space between seconds.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's why it's when people say psychedelic medicine is like 15 years of therapy in one session, it's because it almost literally can be.
Yeah.
That time dilation to a certain degree. I mean, yes, there's all kinds of mechanisms and things, but also just think about the amount of information that is being downloaded and absorbed and utilized. If you were to map it out, it probably is like that. You know,
it's tremendous, huge amounts of information that you take in and people take in those experiences.
I remember my first psychedelic experience was someone, and they told me this is going to be like running an ultra marathon for your brain. And it really is. And that's how they had to explain it to me. You know, also the amount of oxidative stress, the amount of it's a stressful event because you are computing so much. You compare that to like a completely recreational setting, you can see how it's just wildly different. And like what you're absorbing, going to a rave and popping MDMA is a completely different experience than, you can imagine that probably does have negative effects, right? Like also the neuroplasticity of it. It's probably not the best thing. It's just so wild. And I guess lastly, to kind of bring this all sort of full circle, how does this directly apply for people today? What are some things that they can do? Obviously, you've got your book, you've got the Apollo device, you've got things like not everyone's going to have access to go do psychedelics, and it's very limited anyway, because ketamine is the only one that's legal. I mean, what do people do? Like, where do they start? Because it's like there's so much. Like, what can they do today?
So there's a lot you can do, and the good news is most of it's free. I think if anybody is listening and wants to try Apollo, it's now free on the iPhone. So to try it to use, and you can keep using it that way. So you don't need to buy a wearable. The wearable has all the advanced features that prevent you from waking up in the middle of the night and do lots of other fun stuff. But to feel it and to get the relief that we're talking about of having our mind restored back into the body to fully experience the present moment, we now have enabled that to be more easy to access with the iPhone. and you do it for free. So if you think you've tried breathing and you've tried all these other techniques that we're talking about and that they're not able to help you, you're beyond help, try this. Try just like downloading the Apollo Neuro app in the App Store and then hold it to your chest for 2 minutes and close your eyes and follow the instructions on the screen. But the other stuff is, I mean, the real core is to get from the technology-based tools, which are just they're just tools, to get back to nature, to get back to the way we were meant to be in nature, with slowness and stillness and time to appreciate stillness and, practice I talk about this a lot. It's not about a specific breathing technique. It's about just choosing to breathe by choice that matters more. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if the difference is not what specific like breath technique you're using, rather the question is it the environment that's going to be allowed to control my breath, or is it me? Maybe sometimes the environment can, but at times where I feel like I'm having a hard time or I'm struggling or there's hardship coming or whatever, and like I need to feel in control, I'm going to take the wheel. I'm going to start breathing myself. And as soon as you do that, regardless of how you do it, with like how the count or the specific breathing technique, it doesn't really matter to start. All you need to do is just say, I'm going to breathe right now. And then you do it. And you just notice the air coming in your nose, mouth, lungs, filling your lungs, and then notice it leaving when you exhale. And then do it again and start to fill your lungs just as much as you can. And then fill your lungs and empty them as much as you can. And then do it again and fill them just a little tiny bit more each time. It's just the basics, right? We're not talking about anything complicated. We're not talking about any kind of end goal of accessing some wild altered state. We're talking about coming back home to yourself, right? Like coming back, slowing things down, just coming back to the here and now. And all of these tricks, the breathing by choice, humming, singing. It's really hard to ruminate when you're singing, if not impossible, and humming. So it's a really great anti-rumination tip. Don't need to have any skill to hum. And soothing touch is a major one. Music, it's soothing music that's familiar to you. These kinds of techniques are not only free, but they are just almost instantly effective at bringing us back to safe presentness in the body, in the here and now. And we start to realize as we do them very quickly that the body is always here. It's not going anywhere. Like the mind, it might go like from this room to the next room, but it's still in the here and now. It's still in the moment. Our minds could be in the past or the future or now. Yeah. So the best way to restore our mind's sense of safety and comfort in these kinds of situations is to do things that center it back in the body.
Yeah.
And then as we do that, it starts to become a lot easier. It doesn't take a lot of effort. It's like, we're talking like 5-10 minutes a day, but like you just do it and you keep doing it and keep reminding yourself to do it. Whenever you notice you're not doing it, return to your body, return to the present, and return to my breath, right? And then you're strengthening that muscle, and then your attention muscle gets stronger, gratitude muscles get stronger. What else? A whole bunch of other muscles get stronger in your emotional system from doing that work, and eventually you don't have to think about it, and then you look like you on the inside.
Do you think that when people come into that present moment, legitimately, that they become more in tune with the food choices they make?
Absolutely.
Well?
Yeah. Like, because you notice the effect the food has on you after you
feel
eat it.
What it does to you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's what, I guess, and that's where it's just interesting because you talk to, I love it when people have become so spiritual that they're just egotistically spiritual, but they talk about how they can like alchemize like food and energy and electrons into anything. I'm like, that just doesn't make sense to me, but B, like the more present that I am, I shit you not, I feel it. I feel,
no pun intended.
And you could feel, you can feel this is going to sound, and people are going to unsubscribe when they hear this, but I mean, you can feel let me put this. It's going to call it like the energetic signature of food.
Yeah.
Like you can almost feel when food is made like just crappy, or when it's like how an animal was treated, and like it's crazy, but it's like you actually feel this stuff, you know, and maybe your
indigenous cultures talk about that.
Yeah,
So.
like absolutely, right? Like this is like how they treat the animals, like how they, you know, and how an animal is killed versus how it, you know, it makes a difference. But also like you start noticing that like the energetic signature of like ultra processed food, it's so gone through the system so much that it's just, there's nothing left. Yeah. And it's fortified with this, it's like you feel different. Yes, you get calories. Yes, you get basic macronutrients. But are we seriously still thinking that it's all just calories, proteins, fats, and carbs at this point? Like really? There's a lot more going on there.
There's a lot more going on.
So it's glad to hear that you feel that same way too, because it's just, that's one thing that I have noticed the most since it happened after like my first psychedelic experience was I feel food nourishing me now, and I naturally just avoid the things that maybe there was some temptation for, because you just don't want to eat it.
Yeah. It doesn't make you feel good.
No, you're like, why would I eat that? Sure, it tastes good, but it doesn't even taste good. You don't feel good.
Yeah.
It's I'm sure that's accomplished without psychedelics as well, but it's just your body will tell you. Your body will tell you, right?
It will. And it takes practice, right? Like none of this stuff happens overnight. We've been training. This is all learned behavior. Like people need to always remember to be patient, because we did not get here overnight. We've been spending decades learning to be the versions of ourselves we are. So if we want to change that, luckily it won't take decades, but it does take time. And learning to listen to the feeling of your stomach, your gut, your skin, your itchiness level, like your heat, your hot versus cold in your body, like after you eat certain foods, is really important. And as you start to do that, you start to build the kind of connection to food that you're talking about.
Yeah, man. Well, where can everyone find you, and where can they find your book?
You can find my book at my website, which you can also find me, which is drdave.io. And you can find me on socials at Dr. David Rabin on Instagram, Twitter, and probably some other places.
Cool. Right.
Love to hear from you, everybody. So please reach out.
Yeah, we appreciate it, man. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.